In this video, I'm going to talk about the end of World War II, the last part of World War II. So in the first video, I talked about the origins of World War II, early German success. In the second video, I kind of talked about the turning of the tide. Now we're going to talk about the end of the war. So we're going to talk about sort of 1943, second half of 1943 through to 1945. The Allies, the Western Allies, America and Britain, are successful in invading Italy and then France through the D-Day landings. And the Germans attempt to counterattack, but by this point they're being beaten so badly on the Russian front that they're quickly running out of resources. And so by this point it's pretty much assured that Germany is going to be defeated. The Allies insist on unconditional German surrender, and in order to bring this about, they carry out their own campaign of terror bombing against German civilian targets, designed to break German morale and force the Germans to surrender more quickly. The Germans respond with long-range rocket attacks on London, and so here, towards the end of this war, you can see how war is becoming still more remote and still more destructive. In the end, the Americans meet the Russian forces, Hitler commits suicide, and the war in Europe comes to an end. In the Pacific Front, the Americans complete the defeat of Japan. As I said, after the Battle of Midway, despite the Japanese fighting on, they just don't have the resources and the industrial capabilities to compete with the Americans. And so the Americans consistently win victories after Midway, but the campaigns are challenging. The campaigns are it's very difficult fighting. The Japanese developed this practice of using suicide tactics, kamikaze tactics, and the casualty rates are high. And it's thought that it's because of this and fearing further casualties invading Japan that the Americans decide to use a nuclear weapon, new nuclear bomb, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, although these are both, again, civilian targets, primarily civilian targets. What's kind of striking is that the Americans have to drop two bombs before the Japanese are willing to surrender, even after the Japanese see the destruction of Hiroshima. Some of the Japanese in positions of power are so committed to the war that they are willing to fight on. But in the end, after a second bomb and seeing the devastation caused by these new weapons, the Japanese surrender. And so the war is ended. 24 million military deaths and 70 million civilian deaths gives you a sense of how total this war was, how civilians who, even up during World War I, had been removed from the conflict are now threatened and involved in this conflict. It shows you how war is becoming more advanced and more destructive. Europe at the end of this war lies in ruins, and it is obvious that the two new superpowers in the world will be the United States of America and the USSR, the Russians. But you can already see that the brief alliance that they had to fight against the Germans was fracturing, and they were sizing one another up for another conflict that we'll be talking about a little later on.